Hello, and welcome to Silent Frontier Stories. Tonight's story unfolds in a quiet marriage built on secrets, where love slowly grows in the shadow of betrayal and a past that refuses to stay buried. Sit back, listen closely, and discover how far two hearts can go when love stands between revenge and destiny. The wind howled like something alive that night. It clawed through the narrow mountain pass, tearing at Eliza Whitmore's veil as if the land itself rejected her presence. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and the last light of day bled slowly behind jagged peaks that looked like teeth, ready to swallow the world whole. She stood alone, beside a restless horse, her wedding dress already stained with dust and travel, her gloved hands trembling not from the cold, but from something far deeper: regret, fear, and the quiet, suffocating realization that she had just married a man she did not know. Behind her, the path back to town had long disappeared into darkness. Ahead of her, only him, Caleb Hayes, her husband. He stood a few feet away, his broad back turned toward her, one hand resting on the reins of his horse. He hadn't spoken a word in nearly an hour. Not since they had left the last lantern-lit building behind. Not since the whispers of the town had faded into nothing. They said he had nothing. Someone had murmured during the ceremony. No land, no money, no future, a mountain drifter, a mistake. Eliza had heard every word. She had felt every stare. And yet, she had still said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. "Are we close?" she finally asked, her voice small, almost swallowed by the wind. Caleb didn't turn around. For a long moment, she thought he hadn't heard her. Then yes, just one word. Low, steady, distant. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was guarded, like everything about him. Eliza swallowed, tightening her grip on the small leather bag that held everything she had left of her old life. "Is it a cabin?" she asked carefully. "In the mountains." No answer. Only the sound of the wind. Her heart sank. Of course it was. A broken wooden shack. Probably. Barely enough to keep the snow out. A place where dreams didn't survive. A place where she would disappear. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the sting behind them. "This is your life now. You chose this." "No, you were pushed into it." "Why did you marry me?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. That made him move. Not much, just enough that his head tilted slightly, as if the question had weight. Then, slowly he turned. For the first time since the ceremony, Eliza saw his face clearly in the fading light. Strong, weathered, quiet in a way that felt almost dangerous, but it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Not because they were cruel, but because they weren't. They held something deeper, something broken. "You needed a way out," he said. His voice was calm, almost matter of fact. "And you think this is better?" she asked, a fragile edge creeping into her tone. "Running into the mountains with a man no one respects." Another pause. Then he stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cold air. "I never said it was better," he replied quietly. His gaze didn't leave hers. "But it's safer." The word hung between them. Safer. From what Eliza opened her mouth to ask. But before she could, thunder cracked across the sky. And then lightning. It split the horizon for a brief, blinding second. And, in that flash, she saw it. Not a cabin, not a shack, but something impossible, far beyond the ridge, hidden between the mountains. Lights, dozens of them, warm, steady, golden, too many, too bright, too deliberate to belong to a simple mountain home. Her breath caught. "What is that?" she whispered. Caleb didn't look back. He already knew. That, he said quietly, is where you live now. Eliza's heart began to race. This, this isn't a cabin. No. His voice was softer now. Almost reluctant. It's not. Another flash of lightning illuminated the distant structure again. And this time, she saw more. Stone walls, towering shapes. Something vast, hidden, powerful. A place that didn't belong to a poor man. Slowly, she turned back to him, her voice barely a breath. Who are you? For a moment, just a moment, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something he had buried long ago. I'm the man you married, he said. But even as he said it, they both knew. That wasn't the truth. Not the whole truth. And as the storm finally broke over them, as rain began to fall, cold and relentless, Eliza Whitmore realized something she would never be able to forget. She hadn't escaped her past. She had just stepped into something far more dangerous. Something hidden. Something waiting. And somewhere deep inside her chest, despite the fear, a spark of something she didn't understand yet. Curiosity. Or fate. Before the mountains. Before the storm. Before Caleb Hayes ever looked at her with those unreadable eyes. Eliza Whitmore had lived a life that looked, from the outside, almost perfect. The Whitmore estate sat at the edge of town like a fading memory of something once magnificent. White columns, tall windows, manicured gardens, all carefully maintained to preserve the illusion of wealth. But illusions don't last forever. And Eliza had learned that earlier than most. She had been 17 the first time she overheard her father arguing behind closed doors. You promised them repayment, her mother had said, her voice tight with panic. I will handle it. Her father snapped. With what she demanded. There's nothing left. Eliza had stood in the hallway. Frozen. Nothing left. That night, for the first time, she noticed the cracks. The servants dismissed one by one. The dinners becoming smaller. The letters arriving always sealed. Always urgent. And the silence that followed them. By the time she turned 20, the truth was impossible to ignore. The Whitmore name still carried weight, but the Whitmore fortune was gone. And, in a town like theirs, reputation without money was like a candle in the wind. It flickered, and then it disappeared. Eliza had never been weak. That was something people misunderstood about her. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't naive. She simply believed in kindness, in love, in the idea that life could still be something more than survival. She read books when the world felt too small. She dreamed of leaving not to escape, but to build something of her own, a life chosen, not arranged, but dreams, like everything else in her life, began to feel like luxuries she could no longer afford. The offers started coming soon after. Men from neighboring towns, older men, widowers, men with land, men with money, men who saw her not as a woman, but as a solution. She would make a fine wife. They said, she still carries herself well. The name alone is worth the arrangement. Arrangement. The word made her stomach twist every time. Her mother tried to soften it. This is how things are done. Eliza, she would say gently. It's not so terrible. You'll be cared for. Cared for. Like something owned. Like something traded. Her father said less, but his silence said everything. There had been one man in particular, Harold Bennett, wealthy, respected, cold. He had visited often, always polite, always composed, always watching her like she was already his. I can secure your family's future, he told her one afternoon, his voice smooth, controlled. And what about mine? She asked quietly. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Your future will be comfortable. Comfortable. Not happy. Not free. Just comfortable. Eliza smiled politely. But inside, something broke. The decision came faster than she expected. And not from her. Debts had reached a point where waiting was no longer an option. The town knew. They always did. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Such a shame. She had so much promise. It was always going to end like this. Eliza stopped going into town after that. Stopped looking at people. Stopped hoping. Until the day Caleb Hayes walked into her life. Or rather, the day her father mentioned his name. "He's willing," her father said. Not meeting her eyes. Eliza blinked. Willing. To what? To marry you. The words felt unreal. Who is he? A ranch hand. Works in the mountains. Her chest tightened. A ranch hand. Her father hesitated. He has land. He added quickly. But something in his tone didn't sit right. What kind of land? She pressed. Another pause. Then, unclaimed territory. That was when she understood. Not land. Not really. Just wilderness. Isolation. Nothing. Why him? She asked. Her father finally looked at her then. And for a moment, she saw it. The guilt. The desperation. Because he doesn't ask questions. He said quietly. And because he doesn't care about the Whitmore name. That should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her. She met Caleb for the first time 2 days later. He didn't bow. Didn't smile. Didn't try to impress her. He simply stood there. Still. Silent. Watching. As if he saw through everything. Through the house. Through the illusion. Through her. "Do you agree to this?" she asked him directly. No hesitation. Yes. That was it. No charm. No promises. No lies. Just truth. Cold and simple. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that honesty felt safer than anything she had known in months. The wedding happened quickly. Too quickly. No celebration. No joy. Just a contract, sealed in front of witnesses who didn't bother hiding their judgment. She could have done better. She didn't have a choice. Poor girl. Eliza heard them all. But she didn't cry. Not then. Not when she said "I do." Not when she walked away from everything she had ever known. She cried later. Alone. Quietly. Where no one could see. Because deep down, she knew. This wasn't a beginning. It was an ending. The end of her dreams. The end of her freedom. The end of the life she had imagined. Or so she thought. Because what Eliza Whitmore didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that her life hadn't ended the day she married Caleb Hayes. It had only just begun. And everything she thought she had lost was about to be replaced by something far more dangerous, far more powerful, and far more real. Long before the town ever whispered his name, before they called him poor, or pitied him, or dismissed him as nothing more than a mountain drifter, Caleb Hayes had already learned how to disappear. Not in the way a man runs, but in the way a man becomes invisible. The mountains knew him. That was what the older ranchers said. The boy moves like he belongs to the land. One of them had muttered years ago. He don't fight it, he listens to it. And it was true. Caleb didn't walk through the wilderness like most men did, loud. Careless. Always trying to conquer something. He moved quietly. Deliberately. As if every step had purpose. As if every silence meant something. He rarely came into town. And when he did, people noticed. Not because he demanded attention, but because he refused it. He didn't drink. Didn't gamble. Didn't linger. He would tie his horse. Step into the general store. Buy only what he needed, and leave. No conversation. No small talk. No trace. It made people uneasy. Men like that always did. Something's wrong with him. One man had said, or something happened to him. Another replied. Neither of them were entirely wrong. No one knew where Caleb came from. Not really. There were stories. Of course. There always were. Some said he had been a soldier who never came back the same. Others claimed he had once worked for a powerful family until something went terribly wrong. A few even whispered that he had money hidden somewhere, that he wasn't as poor as he looked. But those stories never lasted long, because Caleb never fed them. He never corrected anyone, never defended himself, never explained. He simply let the world believe what it wanted. It was easier that way. Suffer. But there were moments, rare, quiet moments, when the mask slipped, when the silence around him felt too heavy, too deliberate to be empty, like the calm before something dangerous. Old Mr. Calloway, who ran the general store, had seen it once. Caleb had come in late, just before closing. There had been blood on his sleeve. Not much, but enough. "You all right there?" Son Calloway had asked carefully. Caleb paused, just for a second. Then he nodded. "I'm fine." He stubbed began, but his eyes weren't fine. They were sharp, focused, like a man who had just come from something violent, something unfinished. Calloway didn't ask any more questions after that, because instinct told him what logic could not. Men like Caleb Hayes didn't belong to ordinary lives. And yet, he chose one, or at least he chose something that looked like one. The day he agreed to marry Eliza Whitmore, the town nearly laughed. Someone scoffed. "Why would he take her? She's trouble." Another said, "Nothing but debt and a dying name. He's just desperate." That was the conclusion they settled on. That Caleb Hayes, the quiet mountain cowboy, had finally made a desperate choice. But they were wrong, in every way that mattered. Because Caleb hadn't chosen Eliza out of desperation. He had chosen her, very carefully. The first time he saw her wasn't at the house. It wasn't during their meeting. And it certainly wasn't the day they spoke. It was weeks earlier. In town, she had been standing near the edge of the street, holding a basket too tightly in her hands. People passed her, looked at her, whispered, judged, and she pretended not to notice. But Caleb saw it, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her chin lifted just slightly, like she refused to break, the way her eyes searched for something, anything, that might still feel like hope. She didn't belong in that moment, not because she was better than it, but because she was being crushed by it. And something about that, something about the quiet strength she tried so hard to hide, stayed with him. He watched her more than once after that. From a distance, always a distance. Not out of curiosity, but out of recognition, because he knew that look. He had worn it once himself, a long time ago, before everything changed. By the time her father approached him with the proposal, Caleb already knew his answer. Yes, not because he needed a wife, not because he wanted a normal life, but because Eliza Whitmore was standing at the edge of something dangerous, something she didn't understand. And if he didn't step in, someone else would, someone worse. So he made a choice, a quiet one, a final one. He would take her away from the world that was closing in on her, even if it meant bringing her into his. And that was far more dangerous. Because Caleb Hayes wasn't just hiding from the world. He was waiting for the right moment, for the right time, for the right people. And as he rode through the mountains now, with Eliza following behind him, closer to the truth than she had ever been, he knew something she didn't, something she couldn't. The life he was bringing her into was built on silence, on secrets, on blood. And once she saw it, once she understood, there would be no turning back. Not for him, not for her, and especially not for the people who had destroyed everything he once loved. The first time Eliza Whitmore truly met her husband was not at the altar, and it was not the day he agreed to marry her. It was the moment everything familiar disappeared. The mountains rose around them like silent witnesses, dark, endless, unforgiving. By the time they reached the ridge where she had seen the distant lights, the storm had softened into a steady rain. The ground beneath her boots was slick, uneven, unfamiliar. Eliza had never felt so far from the world she knew, and never so close to something she didn't understand. "Careful," Caleb said suddenly. His voice cut through the quiet like a low warning. Before she could react, his hand closed around her arm, firm, steady as her foot slipped on the wet stone. For a brief second, she was weightless, then grounded again, her breath caught. "Thank you," she said softly, pulling her arm back. He didn't respond, but he didn't let go immediately either. His grip lingered for just a moment longer than necessary, as if he needed to be sure she wouldn't fall again. Then he stepped back. Distance restored. Silence returned. They continued walking, but something had shifted. Not much, just enough for her to notice. The closer they got, the clearer the lights became. What she had thought was a trick of lightning wasn't. It was real, and it was impossible. The structure revealed itself slowly, like a secret being forced into the open. Stone walls carved into the mountain itself, tall windows glowing with warm light, iron gates, terraces that seemed to rise out of the earth like something ancient and deliberate. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress, a mansion, a place built not for survival, but for power. Eliza stopped walking, her breath shallow. "This," she whispered, shaking her head slightly. "This can't be yours." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He walked ahead, pushing open the heavy iron gate with ease, as if it weighed nothing. Then he turned back, and, for the first time, there was something almost unreadable in his expression. Not pride, not arrogance, something quieter, something reluctant. "It is," he said. She didn't move. Her heart was racing too fast, her thoughts too tangled. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice rising just slightly. "They said you had nothing. They said they were wrong." The way he said it, calm, certain, final, made something inside her chest tighten. She stepped closer to the gate. Her fingers brushed against the cold iron. "How?" she asked. "How does a man with nothing build?" This Caleb's gaze shifted. Just for a second, toward the mountains behind them, toward something unseen. Then back to her. "Not everything worth having," he said quietly, "is meant to be understood at once." That wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Eliza exhaled slowly, her mind spinning. "You brought me here," she said. "You married me. I have a right to know what I've walked into." For a moment, the air between them changed. Something sharpened. Not anger, but something close to it. "You're safe here," Caleb said. "That's not what I asked." Silence. She took another step forward, closer now. Close enough to see the faint scar along his jaw. Close enough to feel the quiet intensity in the way he watched her. "I left everything behind," she said, her voice steady but soft. "My home, my name, my life, a beat. And you won't even tell me who you really are." Caleb didn't move, didn't look away. But something in his eyes darkened. Not with cruelty, but with memory, with weight. "You'll know," he said finally, "when it matters." Eliza let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "When it matters," she repeated. "That could mean anything. It will mean everything." That answer, that quiet, almost ominous certainty, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain. She stared at him, trying to understand, trying to read something in him that would make this feel less unreal, less dangerous. But the more she looked, the more she realized something unsettling. Caleb Hayes wasn't hiding because he was ashamed. He was hiding because what he carried was too heavy to share. And somehow, somewhere between fear and confusion, Eliza felt something else begin to grow. Something she hadn't expected. Trust, no. Not yet. But curiosity. Slowly, she stepped past him, through the gate, into the unknown. The doors of the mansion opened before she could knock. Not by magic, but by people. Men dressed not like servants, but like soldiers. Disciplined, silent, watching her carefully. Eliza froze. Her eyes moved from one face to another, "What is this place?" she whispered. No one answered. Except him. Behind her, Caleb's voice. Low and steady. "Home." The word echoed through the grand hall as she stepped inside. Marble floors, high ceilings, firelight dancing across stone walls lined with maps, weapons, and symbols she didn't recognize. Nothing about this place was ordinary. Nothing about this man was. And as the doors closed behind her, cutting her off completely from the world she once knew, Eliza Whitmore understood something with terrifying clarity. She hadn't just married a stranger. She had married a mystery, and she had just stepped into the center of it. The first night in the mansion was the longest night of Eliza's life. Not because of fear, but because of silence. The room they gave her was larger than her entire childhood bedroom. Soft candlelight flickered against the stone walls. A fire burned steadily in the hearth. The bed was warm, untouched. Too perfect, too unfamiliar. Eliza stood near the window, her fingers resting lightly against the glass. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly into darkness. The storm had passed, but something inside her hadn't. Nothing about this place felt real. Not the mansion, not the guards, not the man she had just married. She hadn't seen Caleb since they entered. He had disappeared almost immediately, called away by one of the men, his expression shifting into something colder, sharper, more controlled. A version of him she hadn't seen before. And now she was alone, in a place she didn't understand, married to a man she didn't know. "Is this really my life now?" she whispered to herself. No answer. Only the fire crackling softly behind her. She didn't sleep much. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow felt alive. Every thought circled back to the same question. Who is he? Morning came slowly. Golden light slipped through the curtains, softening the edges of the unfamiliar world around her. For a brief moment, everything felt almost peaceful, until she stepped outside her room. The mansion was alive, not chaotic, not loud, but moving, purposefully. Men walked through the halls with quiet efficiency. Some carried supplies. Others spoke in low voices, stopping immediately when they saw her, watching her, not with hostility, but with awareness, as if her presence meant something. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the way it made her feel, like she didn't belong here. "You're awake." The voice came from behind her. She turned, and there he was, Caleb. He looked different in the daylight, less like a shadow, more like something real, his hair slightly damp, as if he had already been outside. His shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing strong forearms marked with faint scars. His expression, still quiet, still controlled, but softer than the night before. "I wasn't sure if I should come find you," he said. Eliza blinked. "You weren't sure? If you should speak to your wife?" A faint flicker of something almost amusement passed through his eyes. "I wasn't sure if you wanted to see me." That caught her off guard. She studied him for a moment. "You left," she said. "I had things to handle." "You always do, yes." The honesty in that answer was strangely grounding. She crossed her arms slightly. "I don't understand this place," she admitted. "And I don't understand you." Caleb nodded once. "That makes two of us." She frowned. "That doesn't make sense." He stepped a little closer, not invading her space, but not distant either. Just present. "I don't understand what this is supposed to be either," he said quietly. "This," he gestured slightly between them. "This wasn't meant to be simple." Eliza's breath slowed. There was something in the way he spoke. No performance, no charm, just truth, raw and unpolished. "Then why do it?" she asked. "Why bring me here?" A pause. Longer this time. Then, "Because leaving you there wasn't an option." Her chest tightened. "That doesn't answer my question." "It's the only answer I can give right now." Frustration flickered across her face, but it faded quickly, because she realized something. He wasn't avoiding her. Not entirely. He was holding something back. Deliberately. Carefully. And for reasons she didn't understand. That restraint felt different from deception. "Come with me," he said suddenly. She hesitated. "Where?" "You said you don't understand this place." A small pause. "Then I should show you." Eliza studied him, searching his face, trying to decide if she could trust this man who was now, somehow, her husband. She didn't know him. Not really. But she also knew something else. She had nowhere else to go. "All right," she said softly. He nodded and turned. They walked through the mansion together. At first, in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was lighter. He showed her the outer courtyards, the stables, the supply rooms, the watchtowers. Every part of the place felt intentional, built with purpose, maintained with care. "This isn't just a home," she said quietly. "No? What is it then?" Another pause. "Then, a place that was built to survive." She looked at him, and now his gaze met hers. Steady, unwavering. Now it's something else. Something in the way he said that made her heart beat just a little faster. They reached the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. The view was breathtaking, endless mountains stretching into the horizon, clouds drifting slowly through the distance. The world far, far away. Eliza stepped forward, drawn to it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yes." She turned slightly, looking at him. "You built this?" A small shake of his head. "No." "Then who did A?" Pause. "My family." That word hung in the air. Family. Eliza's chest tightened slightly. Something about the way he said it didn't feel whole. "Where are they?" she asked gently. Silence. And then, "They're gone." The way he said it, flat, controlled, final, told her everything she needed to know. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, but didn't look away. For the first time, there was no wall in his eyes. No distance. Just something quiet. Something human. And in that moment, standing on the edge of the world, something shifted between them. Not love. Not yet. But understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something neither of them had planned. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began with small things. The way Caleb started waiting for her in the mornings. Not inside. Never too close. But always nearby. The way he adjusted his pace when they walked slowing. Just slightly. So she wouldn't have to keep up. The way he noticed things without asking. A colder room. A heavier silence. A hesitation in her step. And then, the way he remembered. "You don't like the North Corridor," he said one evening. As they walked through the lower level of the mansion, Eliza glanced at him. Surprised. "I never said that. You avoid it." She paused, then realized he was right. "It feels," she hesitated, searching for the word. Too quiet. Caleb's expression shifted slightly. "Then we won't go that way." Simple. Immediate. No questions. That was how it changed. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations, but with quiet understanding, and that was what made it dangerous. Because the closer she felt to him, the less she questioned the things that didn't make sense. Until one night she couldn't ignore it anymore. It was late. The mansion had fallen into its usual stillness. Eliza had woken suddenly, her heart racing, for no reason she could explain. At first, she thought it was just another restless night, but then she heard it. Voices. Low, sharp, urgent, not inside her room, not down the hall. Below. She sat up slowly, listening. "We don't have much time." That voice, Caleb. Her breath stilled. They've started moving again. Another voice. One of the men. "Then we move first," Caleb said. Calm. controlled. But there was something else there. Something she hadn't heard before. Cold. Eliza slipped out of bed. Quietly. Carefully. She wasn't meant to hear this. She knew that. But something inside her, something instinctive, told her she needed to. She followed the sound down the corridor. Barefoot. Silent. The voices grew clearer as she approached a partially open door. Light spilled through the gap. We've confirmed it. 8. The man was saying. The Whitmore name is still tied to it. Eliza froze. Whitmore. Her name. Her blood ran cold. I know, Caleb replied. Silence. Heavy. Then, what do you want to do about it? The question lingered. Eliza's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they could hear it. She leaned closer to the door, barely breathing. And then Caleb spoke. We finish what they started. The words hit her like a blow. Finish. What? Her mind raced. Trying to understand. Trying to make sense of something that suddenly felt very wrong. What about her? The man asked quietly. A pause. Long. Heavy. Eliza's chest tightened. She doesn't know. Caleb said, didn't know what she will. The man pressed. And when she does, I'll handle it. Handle it. The cold certainty in his voice, the same calm tone he used when speaking to her, now felt completely different. Dangerous. Eliza stepped back. Slowly, her entire body trembling. This wasn't just a secret. This was something else. Something bigger. Something darker. And somehow, she was in the middle of it. Her thoughts spiraled. The mansion. The guards. The silence. The way people looked at him. The way he looked at her. You're safe here. The words echoed in her mind. Safe from what? Or safe for how long? She turned quickly now and rushed back to her room. Her breathing uneven. Her heart racing. Her thoughts colliding. Nothing made sense anymore. The man she had begun to trust, the man she had started to understand, was planning something. Something that involved her name. Her family. Something that sounded like revenge. And for the first time since she stepped into the mountains, Eliza Whitmore felt something stronger than fear. Doubt. About him. About herself. About everything. Because one truth had become impossible to ignore. She hadn't married a mystery. She had married a man with a past. And that past was coming for her. Eliza didn't sleep that night. Not even for a moment. She sat by the window until dawn. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself. As if holding on could somehow keep everything from falling apart. The mountains outside were quiet again. Too quiet. Just hours ago, they had felt vast. Beautiful. Almost comforting. Now they felt like a prison. Every memory of the past few days replayed in her mind. The way Caleb had looked at her. The way he had spoken. The way he had said, "You're safe here." A bitter realization settled deep in her chest. Safe, as long as she didn't know the truth. Her fingers tightened against the fabric of her sleeve. Whitmore. Her name. Her family. The words echoed again and again in her head. We've confirmed it. We finish what they started. Her stomach twisted. What had her family done? And more importantly, what was Caleb going to do about it? The door creaked open softly behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew. I thought you'd still be awake. His voice, low, steady, familiar. But now, it didn't feel the same. Did you? She asked quietly. There was a pause. Then, footsteps. Slow, careful. He stopped a few feet behind her. You didn't sleep, he said. No. Another pause. Something's wrong. That almost made her laugh. Almost. You think? She whispered. Silence filled the space between them. Then, what happened? He asked. Eliza closed her eyes for a second. She could lie. Pretend. Wait. But something inside her refused to stay quiet. I heard you. The words landed softly. But they shattered everything. The air changed instantly. Behind her. She felt it. Not anger. Not panic. Stillness. A dangerous kind of stillness. "What did you hear?" he asked. His voice hadn't changed, but something underneath it had. Eliza stood slowly, then turned to face him. For the first time since they met, there was no hesitation in her eyes. No more questions. No more half-answers. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You said my family was involved in something. You said you were going to finish it. What does that mean?" Caleb didn't answer. He just looked at her, and that hurt more than anything. "Say something," she whispered. Another pause. Then, "You shouldn't have heard that." Her breath caught. "That's what you're going to say?" she asked. Disbelief rising. "That I shouldn't have heard it. I was going to tell you." When she demanded, after it was done, silence. That was her answer. Eliza's chest tightened painfully. "So it's true," she said, her voice breaking now. Whatever this is, it involves my family." "Yes." The word hit harder than she expected. "Why?" she asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Because they destroyed mine." The world seemed to tilt. Eliza took a small step back. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." "It is." "You don't know that," she said quickly. "You don't know what happened." "I know exactly what happened." The shift in his voice was subtle but sharp. Not loud. Not aggressive. But final. "You don't understand," she started. "I understand more than you think." Silence fell between them again, heavy and suffocating. Eliza shook her head slowly. "My family isn't perfect. They made mistakes. I know that. But they would never. They would," Caleb said quietly. She stopped. Because it wasn't the words. It was the certainty. "How?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. "How can you be so sure?" A long silence followed. And for the first time, Caleb looked away. Just for a moment, then back at her. "Because I watched them do it." The room felt too small, too tight. Eliza's breath became uneven. "Do what she whispered." Another pause. "Take everything from my family." Her heart pounded. "Everything," she repeated. His eyes met hers. Everything. The weight of that word was unbearable. Eliza's mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man standing in front of her now. "You married me," she said slowly, "knowing who I was." "Yes." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" Silence. "Because you weren't part of it." Her chest tightened. "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" she demanded. Another pause. "Because I chose to believe it." That answer, fragile, dangerous honesty, broke something inside her. "You chose to believe it," she repeated. "Yes." "And if you're wrong?" Silence. The question lingered between them. And for the first time, Caleb didn't have an answer. Eliza felt tears burn in her eyes. "So, what happens now?" she asked quietly. No response. She swallowed hard. "Are you going to destroy them?" A long pause. "I'm going to finish what they started." The same words. The same tone. But now she understood what they meant. Her heart shattered. "And what about me?" she asked. Caleb didn't hesitate this time. "I'll protect you." The answer came too fast. Too certain. And somehow, that made it worse. Eliza let out a soft, broken laugh. "Protect me," she repeated. "From what?" "From you," he didn't answer. And that was the moment everything fell apart. Because in that silence, she realized something she had been trying not to see. She wasn't just caught between two worlds. She was standing on a line that was about to break, between love and war. And no matter what she chose, she was going to lose something. Maybe everything. The silence between them didn't end when the conversation did. It lingered, heavy and unforgiving, like something that refused to let either of them breathe. Eliza didn't say another word. She couldn't. Because anything she said now would break something that couldn't be put back together. So she turned slowly and walked past him, not running, not collapsing, just leaving. Each step steady, each breath controlled, until the door closed behind her, and the distance between them became real. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke. The mansion felt colder, not because of the weather, but because something inside it had shifted. Caleb stayed away. Not completely. Never completely. But enough that she felt it. Meals were sent to her room. Footsteps passed her door, but never stopped. Voices echoed in the halls. But his was never among them. And the worst part was that she missed him. Eliza hated that. Hated how her chest tightened every time she thought she heard him outside. Hated how her eyes searched for him without meaning to. Hated how, despite everything, she still cared. You're stronger than this, she whispered to herself one evening. But the words didn't feel true, because strength didn't mean not feeling, and what she felt was breaking her. It was late when the knock came. Soft, measured. Eliza didn't answer at first. The knock came again. Mrs. Hayes. A different voice. Not his. She stood slowly, walked to the door, and opened it just enough to see the man outside. One of Caleb's men. Older. Calm. There's something you should see, he said. Her stomach tightened. What is it? A pause. Then, the truth. Those words sent a chill through her. I've heard enough truth, she said quietly. The man didn't move. Not this one. Something in his tone, not forceful, not urgent, but certain, made her hesitate. Why, she asked. Because you deserve to know what you're standing in the middle of. Silence followed. Then, slowly, Eliza stepped aside. Show me. He led her through parts of the mansion she hadn't seen before. Lower levels. Stone, corridors. Cooler air. Quieter. No guards here. No movement. Just stillness. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. The man looked at her once, as if giving her a chance to turn back. She didn't. He opened the door. Inside was not what she expected. Not weapons. Not plans. Not maps. But memories. The room was filled with them. Photographs. Old and faded but carefully preserved. Documents. Letters. Records. And at the center, a large table covered in names. Dates. Connections. Eliza stepped forward slowly, her breath shallow. What is this? She whispered. His past, the man said. Her eyes moved across the room, taking everything in. A family captured in still images. A woman with soft eyes. A man with a proud stance. Children smiling. Alive. Her chest tightened. This is his family. Yes. Eliza swallowed. They look, she hesitated. Happy. They were. The answer came without hesitation. Her gaze shifted again. More documents. More names. And then she saw it. Whitmore. Her breath caught. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times. Her hands trembled as she reached for one of the papers. Land agreements. Signed. Transferred. Whitmore. Her vision blurred. No, she whispered. Look closer, the man said gently. She did, and what she saw made her heart stop. The dates. The same years her family had begun to rise. The same years everything had started to change. Her father's arguments. The sudden wealth. The silence. It wasn't coincidence. It was connected. All of this, she whispered. It was taken from them, the man nodded. Through contracts, deals, pressure. A pause. And when they refused to give more, Eliza turned slowly. What happened? The man's expression darkened. They were destroyed. Her breath hitched. How? Another pause. Then, fire. The word echoed in the room. Everything burned. He continued quietly. The house. The land. The people inside. Eliza's hands dropped. "No," she whispered again. But this time, there was no denial in it. Only fear. "And my family," she said slowly. The man didn't answer immediately. "They were involved," he said finally. The words felt heavier now. Because this time, she could see it. The proof. Not rumors. Not anger. Not assumption. Truth. Eliza stepped back, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. "My father," she whispered. Everything made sense now. The desperation. The silence. The guilt in his eyes. He hadn't just lost everything. He had built it on something broken. On something stolen. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," the man replied. That was what made it worse. Because innocence didn't erase truth. And love didn't erase consequences. Eliza turned slowly, looking at the room one last time, at the life that had been destroyed, at the man she had begun to love, standing on the ruins of it. Now she understood. Not just his silence, not just his anger, but his pain. And for the first time, she didn't just see him as a mystery. She saw him as someone who had lost everything and was about to take it back, no matter the cost. Eliza didn't return to her room after learning the truth. Instead, she wandered through the quiet corridors of the mansion, her thoughts heavy and tangled, her chest tight with emotions she could no longer separate: fear, sorrow, confusion, and something else that refused to disappear: understanding. For the first time since she had met Caleb Hayes, she began to see him not as a mystery, but as a man shaped by loss. Not just a man who hid secrets, but one who had been forced to carry them alone for far too long. And that realization made everything more painful, because it meant she could no longer turn away from him so easily. Her steps eventually led her outside, drawn by something she could not explain. The cold air greeted her, sharp and grounding, and the vast mountains stretched endlessly before her, silent and unchanging. At the edge of the cliff stood Caleb, exactly where she had first begun to question everything. He looked as though he had been there for hours, unmoving, as if the weight of his past had rooted him to that very spot. For a long moment, she simply watched him. There was something fragile in the stillness of his figure, something that didn't belong to the man she had feared just days ago. It belonged to someone who had lost everything and had never truly found a way back. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but steady enough to reach him. She told him she had seen everything, not just the documents or the names, but the truth behind them. She had seen the life that had been taken from him, the family that no longer existed, and the emptiness that had replaced it. More than anything, she had seen what it had done to him. That was when he turned to face her. There was no distance left between them now, no silence that could hide the truth. Just two people standing at the edge of something neither of them could undo. Eliza didn't try to deny what her family had done anymore. The proof had stripped away any illusion she had been holding on to. Instead, she spoke of what she now understood: that anyone who had lost so much would want justice. That pain like his did not simply disappear. But even as she said it, she realized something deeper. What he carried was no longer just about justice. It had grown into something darker, something that had been waiting for years to be unleashed. And when she asked him what would remain once it was all over, the silence that followed told her more than any answer could. Nothing. There would be nothing left of him but the revenge he had carried for so long. That thought frightened her more than anything else, because she had come to care for him more than she should have, more than she ever intended to. And now, standing there, she realized she could no longer pretend otherwise. She told him the truth in the only way she could, that she had not chosen her family or the past they had built, but she had chosen him. And despite everything she had learned, despite the pain and the fear and the impossible position she now stood in. She did not regret that choice. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. They were not meant to convince him, but simply to be true. For the first time, something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her. It was the first crack in the control he had held so tightly for years. She stepped closer then, not with certainty, but with quiet resolve. There was no anger left in her, only honesty. She admitted that she should be afraid of him, that she should walk away, that everything she had learned should have been enough to push her out of his life forever. But it wasn't, because what she saw in him was not just the man seeking revenge. She saw the man who had pulled her back from falling in the mountains, the man who had watched her without judgment when everyone else had turned away, the man who had chosen to believe she was not part of the sins of her family. And that mattered, more than it should have, more than she could explain. She told him she didn't want safety, not if safety meant losing something real, not if it meant walking away from the only person who had ever seen her without expectation or condition. She didn't need to say the words directly. They were already there, in the way she looked at him, in the way she refused to step back, in the way her voice softened when she spoke of staying. Caleb understood, and that was what made it difficult. Because for the first time in years, the path ahead of him was no longer clear. Revenge had always been simple. It had direction, purpose, certainty. But this was something else entirely. This required him to choose between the past he had been living in and the future he had never allowed himself to imagine. The wind moved around them, carrying the cold across the cliff. But neither of them stepped away. The world stretched endlessly beyond them, silent and waiting, as if even the mountains understood that something had changed. For the first time since everything had been taken from him, Caleb Hayes hesitated, not because he was weak, but because for the first time, he had something to lose. The days that followed were quieter than anything Eliza had experienced before. Not the kind of quiet that brought peace, but the kind that came before a decision that could not be undone. The mansion continued to move as it always had. Men walked the halls with purpose. Plans were made in low voices, and the world outside seemed distant and untouched. But beneath that surface, something had changed. Not in the walls, not in the structure, but in him and in her. Eliza began to notice it in the smallest ways. The way Caleb no longer avoided her completely, but never stayed long enough for silence to become conversation. The way his presence lingered just at the edge of her awareness, as if he was close, but holding himself back, as if distance was the only thing keeping something from breaking. And maybe it was, because now they both knew what stood between them, not just the past, but what came next. The decision, the inevitable end of everything that had been building long before they ever met. Eliza spent most of those days alone, but not the same kind of alone as before. She no longer felt like a stranger in the mansion. She understood it now. Not just what it was, but why it existed. Every corridor, every guard, every silent movement carried meaning. This place had been built from loss and sustained by waiting. But it was no longer just his story. It had become hers too, and that was what made it impossible to ignore, because staying meant accepting everything that would follow, and leaving meant losing something she was no longer willing to give up. The choice should have been clear. It wasn't. On the third night, the silence finally broke. Not with words, but with movement. Eliza stepped out of her room long after the mansion had gone still, drawn once again toward the open air beyond the walls. The cold wrapped around her as she walked, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were too loud, too present, too impossible to silence. She found him where she always seemed to find him, at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the same endless horizon. But this time, something was different. He wasn't still. He wasn't waiting. He was leaving. His horse stood nearby, already prepared. A small group of men lingered at a distance, their movements quiet but purposeful. Everything about the moment carried the weight of something final. Eliza stopped. Her breath caught. She understood immediately. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. Caleb didn't turn right away, but he knew she was there. He always did. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The distance between them felt heavier than it ever had before, filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they couldn't change. And yet, there was no anger left. Only truth. Only the quiet ache of something that could have been simple, but never was. Eliza stepped forward slowly, not rushing, not stopping, just closing the distance that had been between them since the beginning. She didn't ask where he was going. She already knew. She didn't ask what he was about to do. She had seen enough to understand. Instead, she focused on the only thing that mattered now, the choice. Not his, hers. She could leave. She could walk away from everything before it consumed her. She could return to a life that was smaller, quieter, safe, softer, but empty. Or she could stay and face whatever came next. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Her heart pounded in her chest as she came to a stop just behind him. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the silence settle between them one last time. Then she stepped closer, close enough that the space between them disappeared. And, without hesitation, she reached for his hand. The movement was small, but it carried everything. Caleb stilled, not pulling away, not turning, just feeling it. The warmth of her hand against his, the weight of her choice. Slowly, he looked at her, and in that moment, there was no distance left in his eyes, no walls, no past, just the truth he could no longer deny. She wasn't afraid of him. She had chosen him, knowing everything. And that changed everything. Eliza didn't try to stop him. She didn't ask him to give up the past, because she understood now. Some things couldn't simply be left behind. But she also understood something he hadn't allowed himself to see. That revenge didn't have to be the end of his story. That loss didn't have to define what came after. That he didn't have to face it alone. Her fingers tightened slightly around his. A quiet promise. Not of safety, not of certainty, but of staying. Whatever came next. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not the anger, not the pain, but something deeper. Something he had buried long ago. The possibility of something beyond it. He looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a part of the past. Not as a risk, but as a future he had never planned for. And in that moment, the path in front of him changed. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough for him to make a different choice. Not to forget, not to forgive, but to stop letting the past be the only thing that defined him. The men behind him waited. The world beyond the mountains remained unchanged. But here, at the edge of everything, something new began. He turned away from the cliff. Not from the past, but from the path he had been walking alone. And when he did, he didn't let go of her hand. The mountains remained vast and silent, stretching endlessly beneath the sky. But for the first time, they no longer felt like a place of isolation. They felt like a beginning, not of a perfect life, not of an easy one, but of something real, something chosen, something built not on what had been lost, but on what still remained. And in that quiet, fragile moment, love didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the pain, but it gave them something stronger, a reason to move forward. Together, thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening, for feeling, and for allowing these quiet moments to unfold. There are some journeys in life that don't begin with certainty, but with confusion, with choices made under pressure, and paths that seem to lead us somewhere we never intended to go. And yet, along the way, Something unexpected can take root. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly. In the spaces between fear and understanding. Between distance and closeness. What Eliza and Caleb found was not a perfect love. Nor an easy one. It was something quieter. Something shaped by pain, but not defined by it. A reminder that even in the shadows of the past, there is still room for something new to grow if we allow ourselves to see beyond what was lost and into what might still be possible. Sometimes, the hardest choices are not between right and wrong, but between holding on and letting something change, and in those moments, it is not certainty that guides us, but something softer, something we feel before we understand. Maybe, in our own lives, there are places where we stand, just like they did at the edge of something unknown, carrying pieces of the past we cannot undo. And maybe what matters most is not the weight we carry, but what we choose to do with it when we finally stop and look ahead. So tonight, as this story comes to a close, I hope you carry with you not the conflict, but the quiet possibility that even after loss, even after doubt, something real can still begin. And perhaps, the most powerful turning points in our lives are the ones that happen when we choose not what is easy, but what feels true.